Damian Keeghan, from Trainwreck to business as usual.
Thank you. And that actual blind user that tested my first site is here today, Hamish. Thank you. That was a very game-changing moment for me, and I was extremely embarrassed because I was a little bit proud of the work that I'd done. So, well, thank you. I knew what testing tools Hamish used, so I make sure that there was 0 errors. Unfortunately, usability was terrible. So I've been working at Deloitte Digital now for over 10 years. We're a digital agency / consultancy / a lot of other things. And my main role is to help develop websites, and accessibility has become a really core part of that. So when we think about accessibility, I like to say that it's just usability that's more inclusive. I say this because for a long part of my career, accessibility has been the domain of the front-end developer. And it's not that. It's a team effort, and it's not just added by those developers at the end. And this is where we get caught out. And so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about a few case studies of some examples of projects that I've done over the past 13 plus years, and how they've gone, well, the worst example, which is we thought about accessibility when dev was completed. A bad example, when about halfway through development, we started accessibility. A better example, where we had UX and design completed. And the best example, which is what we try to do now with all of our projects, and that's thinking about it up front. So we'll jump in with the worst and we'll get better. So names have been changed to protect their identities, and I've checked, and I'm pretty sure none of these clients are here today, so that's good. All right. So the worst example. So the context for this. We were asked to design and build an internal data reporting tool. This reporting tool was going to basically take a lot of complex data in and display it in a really nice visual way. At the client request, accessibility was not in scope for the project, and Deloitte is a large place. This wasn't part of our Deloitte Digital team, and so I wasn't around to say no, but it should be. So unfortunately, it got through and they started building it. The reports that they had that would export out of this tool would need to be published monthly on a public website. Now, what happened? Well, they created an Excel sheet which was produced to export out to this amazing designed PDF. Like seriously, when they showed me the PDF, I thought it was PowerPoint, and it was beautiful, and it was generated from Excel. Incredible. But the first thing that I said when I looked at that was, oh crap, you're making Excel look like PowerPoint into a PDF. This is not going to end well. The public website that it had to go on had to adhere to level AA accessibility because it was a government entity. So not fantastic. But worst of all, a key internal stakeholder for that report was blind. And so when they tried to have a look at it, there was nothing. There was nothing you could do. PDF, as many of you might know, essentially just deleted all the content out of it in the read view. And so you really couldn't tell the difference between what was an image and what was content because it would just have nothing displayed. And so what was the impact of this? Well, there was about a 75% increase in project cost because that report had to be redone. We started out looking at it, and actually I think I had Sarah Poulos from Intopia come and help me find someone. I wanted a PDF expert to go into the PDF tools and try and make it better. We quickly discovered that was just not going to work, and so we had to start again. And so what we ended up having was 2 different reports. We had a report and an accessible report, which I was not happy about, because that also increased 50% effort for the content authoring team every time that they would do a report. And then remember, that was monthly. So they've just made more work for themselves, and they've significantly increased the cost. Straight on the back of that project, we came in and sat down and talked to the client about the importance of accessibility. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. All right, let's move on to the next one. A little bit more positive. This was where I first met Sarah, and I got one of the devs in the room here as well. The client had designed and were building a large public-facing portal. So they were already about halfway through build. Their dev team decided to use an uncommon JavaScript framework called Polymer. And the main reason they chose that was because in the GitHub repository there was some ARIA tags in it, and they thought, great, it's accessible. They also had an extremely large amount of highly customized form elements. By highly customized form elements, I mean things like 100% custom drop-downs. There was not a select box in sight, it was all divs. So interesting, very interesting. I think Saxon down here has nightmares about this project. So what happened? Well, halfway through, we were asked to come in to help them out, try and make it accessible. The JS framework that they had chosen just did not meet accessibility requirements. When we spoke to Google about it, they said, oh yeah, we haven't got that working yet. That's the next release. I don't think that release has ever come out though. But they were like, you shouldn't be using this in production anyway. So we were on the back foot to begin with. The other thing that we had was that we would make something work outside of that framework in JavaScript, and it would work perfectly for all 3 screen readers that we were testing for. We were extremely happy with it. We put it into the framework and it would stop working for at least 1 or 2 of them. We don't know why. I was talking to Sarah this morning about it. We are really surprised that we actually managed to pull this project off. So we added a whole new dev squad. So I think there was about 7 or 8 development squads in there already. We added an additional squad that was just full, so 7 front-end developers and 3 testers, and a full-time accessibility expert. We added it in there to go and uplift every single component to make sure that it was accessible. One of these components, that drop-down I talked about, was 52 man days, and I know this because I counted it all. And I had quoted out earlier, if we just stop, redesign it, and rebuild it, it would take us 5 days. No, we want the design. So 52 days it was. So what was the impact of that? It was 35% increase in the project cost. Now, this was a big project cost. I'm not going to say numbers, but it was a very big project cost, so that's not a small amount of impact to their team. 96% of the UI components that were built already had to be touched by our dev team. We had to go and change 96% of the stuff that was in there. It might have been higher than that. We might have actually touched everything, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure close to 96%. On the other side of that, I believe there was about 15% potential missed savings on this site. Why I say that is because of the overcomplication of the design. If we'd thought about it earlier, we wouldn't have designed something so complicated, which would have made it easier to build and easier to use, and it would have been cheaper overall. All right, so let's get better now, right? Asked to do the development of an enterprise-scale public-facing website, right? Pretty common task that we do, very large projects on a content management system. The dev team was not involved during the design process. Sometimes it still does happen in a waterfall environment. The brand consisted of white on pastel colors. I am so surprised how common it is that I receive a brand document, even ones that, like one that just came out about 6 months ago, when I look at the colors and they're not accessible. And then I ask about accessibility and they go, oh no, we've got accessible colors, and they show me and I put it into color contrast checker and they're not accessible. So it's constant. So I think one thing we need to do is get the ad agencies and brand agencies on board. But at least when we saw this, we could just hold up, let's not build anything yet, let's have a look. So we flagged accessibility requirements before the build started. Color contrast was addressed immediately. Luckily, using, we could just swap some colors around, and some of the colors that we used were just quite off. So we could just tweak some. There were some discussions with brand teams, and they were had and luckily passed. That was good. I remember, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, we convinced the Australia Post dev team, brand team to allow us to change the red just a little bit to make it accessible, and they did, because they said, it doesn't look any different. Yes. Sometimes they are very protective of their light colours. Minor reworks for the design were delivered in parallel to development. So it meant that we didn't hold up development, we didn't hold up the dev teams, we could just get on with it, which was good. So what was the impact of this? Well, it's not going to be as bad as the last ones, right? There was about a 5% increase in project costs where we just had to do some tweaks in the design. There's about 15% of rework that needed to be done by the UX and design teams. And as our tools get better, so things like Sketch, means that if you need to change a color, you don't need to go through every Photoshop file. You can just change a color in the palette and it comes through if you do it properly. So these kind of things were getting a lot easier to do for us. So the context, this is the best example, and this is the example that I try to do for every project that we do from now on. And so I'm gonna tell it in future facing, right? And this is what you guys should do for all of your projects as well. What we did is we raised awareness of accessibility to all our teams. So we had our people from our user experience team, test team, design teams here at some of the sessions yesterday. We've got some of our guys here today, got some of the guys tomorrow. Raising awareness of accessibility is the most important thing that we can do, because as soon as it's in someone's mind, they just start thinking about it. Involve accessibility considerations right at the start of each project that you do. One thing that I found when I quote projects now is that I don't add time for accessibility because it's just best practice, right? That's our point of view, that's what we do. It's just best practice web development, right? It's just included in the cost, it's not an additional. And as soon as you start saying, if a client says, we don't need accessibility, and you say, well, it doesn't actually cost you any different, we're gonna do it anyway. So always assume at least, the very least, level A compliance, even if you're told not to. So we just don't give them a choice, basically, accessible or not. So what happens in this scenario? Well, accessibility and usability become a single deliverable, right? It's a whole deliverable for everyone in the team. We have simpler design patterns and better usability for all of our users, right? This is one thing that I can't stress enough. If we are upfront, are really considerate with our design, we don't need to build as complex websites, because you know what? Most people don't want a complex website. They want a simple, easy to understand website. And that can come back to even content. I prefer dot points over paragraphs of text. Now, I remember looking back, way back when we used size 8, size 10 font in our designs, if you remember those days. We would make designs that would have so much white space around it because of so little text that we would go, you know what we need to do to make this design better? Add more content. We don't need to do that, right? And it makes everyone's job easier if we do it simpler, right? Everyone wants simpler websites. I don't think if you ask anyone, would you prefer a more complex site or a simple site? Which one they'll choose? I don't know. Which one would you guys choose? Simpler? I hope so. I'm not gonna let you answer that. Okay. No more crazy reworks implemented at the last minute as well. Dev teams love it. We hate doing crazy reworks at the last minute for anything, let alone accessibility. It's so much easier to do up front. And so what's the impact of this? Well, as you would assume, 0% increase in cost. Awesome. And also what you get is 100% less, why didn't you think about this, emails from Damian, right? I tend to send some of these emails quite a lot to our dev teams and our design teams. You don't have to see these anymore. It's great. Everyone wins. So all it takes is one person on your team, no matter who they are, to just think about accessibility and raise it to the project team, and it will happen. At least I would like to think it does. Right? When we think about, say, user personas, if we think about a persona that we come up with when we're doing UX research, why don't we just apply another lens to that and say, for each of these 6 personas, we're going to think about this persona, but now their input is slightly different because they might have a cognitive impairment, they might have a visual impairment, they might have a motor impairment. If we can think about that, we can double our personas immediately. And that comes back to some of the previous talks we've heard today, which is, these personas, that everyone's person, everyone's different. It's just input methods might change. And if we can think about that, implementing this stuff becomes really simple. So I wanted to leave time for questions, if anyone's got any. Yes? Oh, we're waiting for the microphone.
Hi there.
Hi.
My name's Joe. Thank you for your talk. You talked about some of those interface elements that had to be redesigned. Would you like to go into a little bit more specifics around particular examples?
Sure thing. Anytime you have a form element and you change it from a form element in HTML, you're doing it wrong, and change it back, please. HTML form elements are great. They work really well, so use them. If you want to change, let that drop down, for example, was all divs and ARIA tags and JavaScript, the amount of JavaScript involved to get that thing working. And I think in the end, we didn't actually get it working 100% because one particular combination of browsers would double read out a label or something. So a normal drop-down just worked. So just simple. Other format elements, things like radio and checkboxes where people just use them as divs instead. You can have the radio and checkbox elements. So it comes down to core HTML. It's just use the form elements that are there. I don't think we need to redesign anything to save the world. This stuff is quite simple. It should be at least. Yeah. Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Cam. I was just wondering, so you sort of talked about, a while ago you had this bad process and now you got the good process and everything's happy, but surely there's still issues, and what sort of things do you still experience even when you are thinking about it from the start? And, what do you sort of, maybe it's a code review or design review or whatever, and you sort of go, wait a minute.
Yeah. Look, it definitely does happen. We have, it's an education piece, and I think some people think they know, oh yeah, I know how to handle accessibility to make it work for a screen reader, but that's not it, right? That's not the whole thing. I remember when we first started testing screen readers, we were using the tab key, and we were told to stop that immediately when we realized, people actually navigate by regions or by arrow keys. It's a very different way of navigating. So you might think, you might have people in your projects that think they know everything there is about accessibility, and the thing is, as with the web, right, it's impossible to know everything. So it's just being considerate and understanding that there are other bits and pieces. So we've got people in our team who are specialized in different areas, and so getting them involved is the big one. And where projects fall down is when we don't communicate. So that communication part is absolutely key. And sometimes it's up to the people who really care about the accessibility part to just inform to people. Because I think that people don't miss it because because of malice or spite, or they don't want to do it. They miss it because they just don't think about it. It's not front and center. So you need to find those people who are and give them the permission to really just go and stop a project in its tracks and say, we need to think about this. So advocates. Thanks.
Damian, I love to hear people like you advertising HTML. That's fantastic. I'm just wondering how many of you and other people actually contribute to the development of HTML and accessibility, because it's led by an Australian. It's quite an important thing to. Do you have a chance to actually put the feedback back on them?
Me personally, I haven't had too much of a chance. I have done some of some of the working group stuff, but nothing major. When I look at the technology, you can see, if you think about HTML tags, right? There's so many of them that people don't quite understand, and so what I believe is that we can solve a lot of the problems that we have using the tools that we already have. We build a lot with for enterprise, and so we're sometimes a bit hampered by the amount of browsers and things that we need to support. We need to do backwards compatibility quite far, and so we tend to be looking at what is implementable now for the best experience. And so I think there's definitely cases where we could do more in that space where we find an issue that we've got. But unfortunately, the way, the speed that this whole market works and the persistence for IT teams to still have IE is just draining on us.
Tracy from the Diversity Council Australia. I realise that a large number of the people in the room here are developers. I just wonder what you see as your responsibility once you've handed over the product to maintain its accessibility. There are so many people, you know, a website is never a static thing. And where do you draw the line at saying, okay, I've done my job, or do you educate the people who are going to be maintaining that site on the basic elements? I realise not that they probably won't change the code complexity, but those basic elements of using headings and using and making sure the colour contrast of images that are imported meet with a colour contrast.
Yeah.
So where does the responsibility of the developer finish?
Yes, that's definitely a great point. We as developers will give the tools to help you be as accessible as possible, but the content management systems and the tools that are there that they're using, we need to also give advice and guidance on how to use it. When you think about the difference between level A, AA and AAA, in my opinion, the actual technology, like the coding that sits behind going to AA to AAA isn't that big, right? It's the content itself that becomes the hardest part for our clients to maintain. And so when I have a client say to me, oh, yeah, we're going to be AAA, and I'm like, great, here's all the things you need to consider. And they go, oh no, but you're going to build it for us. I'm like, no, you need to be really wary up front that you need to do all of this stuff. And if you can't say that you're going to do that, videos in particular, if you say you can't do that, then you need to think about how you can. And so, we can give guidance around how they do it, but as a consulting job, sometimes, we step out at the end of a project, and I think this is the same with any designer or UXer. When you get to the end of a project and you deliver it, and then you come back 6 months later to show it to someone, and you look at the image selection they chose on the front page, and you're just like, no, what have you done? You've destroyed my baby. We still feel that from an accessibility perspective as well. So education for our developers is one thing, but education of our clients as well is super important. So user guides, thinking about it in everything.
Thank you, Damian.
Oh, Hamish?
We're focused on time, so
Okay.
apologies if there was one other question there, but we are short on time now for the moment, because we have
Thank
to do
you.
changeover. So thank you, Damian.
All right.
Alley Camp, October 2018.